All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to alert you to great theories and discoveries and concepts that you wouldn't otherwise know because they have been suppressed, things that you aren't going to find unless you do a great deal of digging, and then even if you can find them that way, you may not know how to put it into the proper context of your own life. Um, some some of these things are a little bit difficult and just require a little bit of guidance to be able to put them into your own life. And we have been doing a lot of Bible decodes over the last year. This is number 312, and we've looked a lot at different kind of suppressed ways of looking at the Bible. In particular, we've looked at the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament, which many scholars have been putting out books and articles on, but that is that the Romans were the true authors of the New Testament. Obviously, this is something that you're not going to hear your priest or reverend tell you, and you're also not going to hear your theologian tell you at your university, but there's a great deal of evidence for it. And so we've gone over a lot of that different evidence from books of Joseph Atwill, Michael Menescott, Henry Davis, James Valiant, Abelard Reuchlin, and now we're looking at some of the work of Roman Piso, who is an independent scholar, claims to have been a descendant of the Piso family, who are one of the very powerful Roman families back in the imperial days. The Pisos were known as the Little Caesars, and they had a little kind of a little civil war going with the Julian dynasty, the Caesars of Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero for about a century there in the late 1st century BC and 1st century AD. And then Roman Piso emphasizes what he calls, just that everybody, not just in Roman history, but throughout ancient history, all the way up to really the beginning of the printing press, all of the ancient authors that you've heard of are mainly pen names, aliases, pseudonyms, and that all of them are merely representatives of the royal family. The royal families of whether it is the pharaoh or the Caesar or the king are the people that are putting out literature, regardless of topic, religion, philosophy, politics, history, science, or math. All of it's being written by the royals, who are the only people who have access and resources to do so. And also that they write in what he calls the royal language. These royals are kind of in cahoots with each other, and they have a very, very stark information advantage. Many of them, especially in the case of the Romans, are multilingual, and so when they write for the benefit of each other. They write for other royals, and when they do so, they put their writing in code so that the general public is misled by the writing, whereas the insider to the royals, they can interpret what is being read. And so they have a number of devices that they use in order to kind of mask the true meaning of their writing while still leaving it clear for their fellow elites. And these are things like switching consonants, N to R, and vice versa, R to T, and C to G, C to CH. Also, when dealing with languages like Hebrew, where there are no vowels, they insert whatever vowels are convenient for them. They use puns and riddles. If somebody has a name that is an anagram of another word, they'd use that. Or if it's a, all these royal people all have several names because they take, is their form of ancestor worship. They take their famous ancestor's name and affix it to their given names. And so they have a number of different names that they go by already. But then if they're writing, then they permutate all those names to proliferate the amount of different aliases that they use. And in Roman Piso's research, he focuses a lot on his ancestor named Arius Piso, who is actually a person who really never shows up in the historical record. No mainstream historian really even talks about him at all because he doesn't show up. He's every place he shows up, he's using an alias. And he used aliases such as Hero of Alexandria, Nicomachus of Gerasa, and it most importantly used the alias of Josephus, Flavius Josephus. And you probably know who Flavius Josephus is, famous Roman historian. I believe that if you look at the greatest selling books of all time, the Bible is number 1, and one of the books by Josephus is number 2. So he's well known by Christians because he is the first and only author from the first century who is not, not in the Bible, a first author other than the Bible to mention the name of Jesus and to, vouch for his existence. And so Christians use him as independent corroborating evidence of the existence of Jesus. However, this justification doesn't work when you embrace the Roman origins hypothesis and recognize that, the only reason that Josephus corroborated the existence of Jesus is because he's in on the psychological operation that the Romans were running for their writing of the New Testament, which was really for the social control of Jews who had run amok basically within the Roman Empire and had resorted to constant revolutions and insurrections and assassinations and terrorist attacks that were plaguing the Romans, and super high maintenance for the Romans to administer and to look after ever since the Romans conquered Judea in 63 BC. And so the Romans under the Flavian emperors, which are Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. from 69 to 96 AD, they wrote a story of a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace, in contrast with the Messiah who was predicted, according to the Old Testament scriptures, of coming at this time, and that this Old Testament Jewish Messiah was a military commander who was going to free the Jews from the conquering power, in this case the Romans. And so the Romans wanted to head that off at the pass, and they only partially did so because the war that they got into with the Jews from 66 to 73 AD was really started by a number of self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs who believed that they were the Messiah and that they would rise up against the Romans. And that's what started this revolt of 66 AD, which caused Emperor Nero to call on his general Vespasian to come in and quell the revolt. Now, Vespasian did so and eventually became named the new emperor after Nero was assassinated and three other Roman emperors were assassinated. Then Vespasian became the new emperor in 69 AD, and he left the military campaign to his son Titus, who then eventually becomes emperor after Vespasian dies 10 years later. So the first two of the Flavian emperors were both participants in this war against the Jews, and they witnessed firsthand the kind of fervor that the Jews fought with, especially being guided by these various self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs. And so they had strong motives to invent a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking the extra mile and turning the other cheek, and at the same time going after the Jews by overturning the tables of the money changers and castigating the Jews who were selling small animals at the outside of the temple, telling his disciples to abandon their families. These are all things that are inserted by the Romans with specific aims to kneecap the Jews exactly where they wanted to in terms of their rituals, their family structure, their infrastructure, and their kind of a willingness to die for their beliefs. So anyway, this character named Josephus, he wrote a 7-volume history that is called War of the Jews, which is a war about this war that we were just discussing. And it came out right at the same time that the book of Mark came out, the first gospel, in the 70s AD. And the book of Mark was written by the Romans, and it was backdated by 40 plus years to be set in the late years of the reign of Tiberius. And so you've got those two works, but then when you look at them side by side, when you put Josephus side by side with the New Testament, you can see pretty clearly that they were written by the same hand or hands, and that they have many points of reference between each other. They are parodying each other. And one example of the parody is how the ministry of Jesus, described in the Gospels, in particular in the book of Luke, is nothing but a replica of the military campaign of Titus as described in War of the Jews. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus goes, in the same order, and at each location they encounter parallel events, and and those parallel events are 40 years apart. And we're talking about over 40 separate events, all in the same order, or almost in the same order, and all thematically analogous or typologically similar. And so that's just one of a very large number of thematic parallels between Josephus and particularly the book of Luke, but all of the Gospels, that indicate that Josephus is also the true author of the New Testament. And that is the conclusion that was arrived at by a number of different scholars: Joseph Atwill, Henry Davis, Michael Menescotts, Abelard Reuchlin, Ralph Ellis, and Roman Piso. In the case, though, of both Reuchlin and Piso, they not only determined that Josephus was the true author of the New Testament, but they also determined that Josephus was a person who never existed and that he was merely a pen name of Arius Piso. And so that is kind of where he's coming from. And we're just kind of going over a lot of his notes from many of the almost 200 separate articles that he has on one of these research sites. And he claims to have written a lot of books that have been lost to posterity through various computer snafus. And he does have a few of the books as part of this collection of the articles. Some of the articles are book length. I've gone over most of them, not all of them. A lot of the work he does is genealogical, and much of the other work that he does is really, because he's trying to find the clues of who is who, which alias is whom, and all that. So he uses a very unorthodox approach, which I have sympathy for, because I use that same type of approach, at least in part, for my historical work, which was on United States history. In the case where there just isn't evidence out there, when there is no sources, then you have to rely on things that are more tenuous. But if you have enough of it, you can make the proper inferences, and then they can be verified. So we're at the point he's saying Arius Piso died in 118 AD, born in 37 AD. That was the same date that Josephus was also born. So he lived a very long life. Much of the Gospels, though, the Gospels were, according to them, were written by Arius Piso, but the rest of the New Testament was generally written by his descendants, his children, grandchildren, his younger brother, who was Pliny the younger foster brother, named Pliny the Younger, famous Roman writer, and they mostly wrote the New Testament. But he says here, Christianity flopped. So this was a big psychological operation. The Gospels were really written as plays to be performed in front of audiences. And Piso wrote himself in as a starring role for Jesus, but he also wrote himself in to be God and to be Satan, who is also a product of this Roman fiction. And he also played Peter once Jesus was crucified. and his sons played the various disciples. Pliny the younger played Paul, and so on and so forth. But they kind of barnstormed with this troupe to perform these plays in front of people, and it didn't really catch on. People either didn't really buy it, or maybe they bought it for a little while, and they attempted to turn a lot of the pagan sites into Christian churches. It never really worked out. And so as a result, Christianity was mainly on paper for the whole 2nd century and the whole 3rd century. It really didn't get off the ground in spite of the efforts of the Piso family and their descendants. And all of the early church fathers, Justin Martyr, Clement of Rome, Irenaeus, Origen, Tertullian, all of these, Ignatius, all of these people are pen names of the Piso family. So they were basically writing their different diatribes during this time, creating various controversies and arguments and polemics with other of the church fathers. Oh, I believe that this is true, or no, I believe that this is true. This was all a hoax to make it look like the church was burgeoning, and that people had strong passions about it, and that people really believed in one thing or another. And so they wrote in contradictory terms. One church father would write one thing, and the other church father would write the opposite thing, and they would feud with one another. Kind of like World Wrestling Federation or something like that. And then they also, in addition to that, they also named a succession of popes, which at this point in time were just known as the Bishop of Rome, the bishops of Rome. And so the first 10 bishops of Rome were also direct descendants of Arius Piso. And then he also claims that the first 30 popes, going all the way up into early modern times, I think, I don't know how far that list goes, at least up to, what's his name, Charlemagne, were all direct descendants of the Piso family. And he provides genealogical work for this. I'm not qualified to really study or understand how to do genealogical work, especially on time periods that remote. But he has the documents there, so if you are a genealogist, then you should probably check that out. So anyway, he's talking about kind of the development of the church in the early years. Piso and his family were determined to do it on the cheap, like meaning to put this Christianity hoax together on shoestring budgets, and they thought that the believers would take on most of the burden of building the churches, funding church maintenance, paying pastors, and missionary work, converting the existing pagans, and the pagan sites into churches. But when those early churches began to fall, those trying to keep the churches and the religion itself going had to resort to prostitution in those churches. And there's a lot of archaeological work out there that shows that a lot of the old Christian churches, as well as the Jewish synagogues, or whatever they called them, temples at that time, that they had all of these side rooms for sex dalliances with prostitutes. Also, if you look at the Pauline epistles, which were written by Pliny the Younger, along with one of Piso's sons, all the places that Paul goes, all of these different churches in, Ephesus and Thessalonica and stuff, it's really like a tour guide for the best brothels in the Roman Empire. I think he does the same when he goes to Rome. He points at all of the best brothels. Incidentally, Pliny was at one point was banished to, I believe it was an island, but it might have been just a remote area in the hinterlands of the Roman Empire for sexually assaulting a young boy. And he, which means that, that wasn't even a crime for a Roman royal to sexually assault a young boy, because they all had sodomite slaves. They all had sex slaves that was their job, was to perform sex anytime that their master wanted them to. And so many of these people, and keep in mind, this is the Romans. These are like the most debauched and degenerate people that have ever walked the earth, just about, the first century Romans. And they all, or many of them, had young boys as sex slaves. And so the fact that Pliny got banished to an island or a remote location as a punishment for this is that means that he was actually sexually abusing another royal, not just your average person, because that wasn't really against the law. What was against the law was to do it against one of his own people. So he couldn't even keep it in his pants enough to refrain from sexually assaulting another boy, a young boy who was also a royal. Okay, and this is Paul. This is what Paul's doing. And if you read the Pauline epistles and Revelation, and in Joseph Atwell's book, he does talk about how the book mocks Paul as a castrated sodomite slave. Joseph Atwell says that the word Paul itself means tiny, and at his conversion at Damascus, Atwell claims that actually was his castration. He was castrated on the road to Damascus. That was his conversion, and that's when Saul becomes Paul, tiny. And then later on, at the end, there's a depiction, I believe it's in Revelation, of a 90-year-old man who's been castrated, and that is a mockery of Paul. So, both of these authors are kind of on the same track here as far as that goes. Now, after the actual physical churches failed, the family had to resort to keeping it alive in literary form. That is, they created the illusion of Christianity still being practiced and alive from between 120 AD to 300 AD, even creating the illusion of Christian persecutions by Roman emperors. And there's certainly a fair amount of literature out there nowadays that shows that the persecution of Christians by the Romans was greatly overstated. I believe what's her name? Candida Moss, as she says, the woman that's named after two separate kinds of fungus. Candida Moss is got a book on this very topic. Now, Justice Piso, who was one of the sons of Arius, was also Pope Sixtus, who was the seventh pope, and or the seventh bishop of Rome, and also Justin Martyr. He had been planning on how to do that successfully in his whole life. His ancestor Arius Piso was an inspiration to him, and he could not wait to make his ancestors' previously failed religion become a reality. So Justus, his son, was fully on board with this and motivated as well to do this. Other rulers were preventing that, so as long as they still held power, they were not going to allow it. Now, once Constantine comes in the early 4th century, who is also a direct descendant of Arius Piso, he is basically declares that Christianity is, not only accepted but encouraged within the empire. I believe it's not until slightly later that it becomes the official state religion. Not quite sure on that. Let's see. Other Roman emperors. Now, there was some persecution of Christians by specific emperors, especially Domitian, who was the 3rd Flavian emperor, who was not really on board with the whole thing. He really disliked his brother Titus, and he put a number of Christians to death, but it wasn't because they were Christians. It was really because they were his own family members, and Domitian put a lot of people to death. So it wasn't like he was singling out the Christians. He just happened to put a number of Christians to death because he put a lot of people in general to death. This Emperor Diocletian, who just was before Constantine, he was totally opposed to the whole thing. And so once he retired, Constantine began preparations for establishing Christianity. He killed many people, including members of his own family. He killed his wife Fausta in 326 AD. He killed Emperor Maximian, relative of his, back in 310 AD. Killed his son, Crispus, and many of the people who were his family or his relatives. He killed because he did not want them as possible rivals to the Roman royal throne. He killed Licinius Augustus, another relative, and his character named Lucianus. Okay, now he gets on to starting to talk about Pliny the Younger,